Welcome to this AWS webinar on CloudFormation. We're coming at you from Seattle, and my name is Luis Colon. I am a senior developer advocate for AWS CloudFormation here in Seattle. And our session today is called Infrastructure as Code Testing Strategies. I'm joined today by Dan Blanco, who's also a developer advocate for CloudFormation here at AWS. Let's get started. Today, we're going to cover testing strategies when it comes to working with CloudFormation code. Our agenda looks as follows. We will first talk about how do we treat template code as code. If we're going to call it infrastructure as code, we might as well do that. And what does it involve treating CloudFormation code or CloudFormation templates as code? We'll talk about setting up a CI/CD pipeline, setting up your authoring environment in a way that it makes it as productive as possible for you to develop and troubleshoot either new or existing CloudFormation code. We'll also talk about taking advantage of some testing tools and adding steps into our pipeline that become testing stages. This is something that you would do with non-infrastructure code, and in many cases, it does apply to infrastructure code as well. And we'll only use a couple of tools that are relevant to CloudFormation, although many other tools do exist. Then we'll put it all together, going through and analyzing a CloudFormation template that has errors, and then going through the process of setting up the pipeline, inspecting the template, resolving issues, and then bringing it to a point that the template does what it's supposed to do. And then we'll suggest some next steps. To get started, let's talk a little bit about the process of treating infrastructure as code. And this will look very familiar if you're doing any other sort of coding that is not infrastructure related. Oftentimes, we meet a lot of CloudFormation users and customers that come perhaps from a non-coding environment, come from doing scripting on machines or servers, and that is very much a common case. But they don't take advantage of some of the tooling and some of the productivity aspects available if you do treat it truly as code. So we'll go into these steps. The first thing that should happen whenever you're dealing with any code is to put it on version control. And this also applies to templates. Ideally, you should be mindful that your templates themselves are part of the code, but even the parameters that go into templates, if you're using, for example, CloudFormation parameter files, should also be in version control as well. In most cases, much like you would do with code as well, you want to keep from having specific configuration items hard-coded in your template, especially when the templates get very complex. By bringing these configuration items as parameters or external parameters that you can use, say, from Secrets Manager or Parameter Store, it makes your templates more reusable. So putting your source in version control is always a good idea. And you can do it with AWS services as code commit, or you can use GitHub or GitLab or some of those tools that are very popular with our users and customers. When it comes to actually creating a pipeline, you also go through the process of packaging or building or putting your application code in a place that it's suitable to be deployed to an environment. This is what typically is called a build test. This is where you can run things like static analysis, unit test, and other types of tests that you might want to run. Here's important here is that over time, you'll keep adding code and the build will become more complex and it will take more time. So as you're building pipelines, we recommend that you go and measure and monitor how your pipeline is doing. And in many cases, you'll need to upgrade the hardware that's your pipeline is running on to make it more efficient. There have been cases with large code bases where the pipeline might take 10 or 15 minutes, and it might require you to actually do some performance tuning on that. And that's the build step. When it comes into testing, you typically do several different types of testing when you're dealing with code. You might be familiar with unit tests, end-to-end test, integration test. If your code has to do with web pages or with a user interface or with a mobile app, you may design some types of user experience tests. You also will have tests that run after you deploy the code in an environment like a production environment or even a non-production staging environment. Those are typically referred to as smoke tests. And that doesn't even include other types of testing, including performance tests, security tests, etc. For this CloudFormation specific case, we're going to concentrate on static test analysis and then the tests that are provided by a tool provided by AWS called TaskCat. But as I mentioned before, there are many other testing tools that you can bring to bear into this process. Once you've gone through one or several testing stages or steps, then you're ready to promote code to either non-production or production environments. And this whole combination of steps is what typically people refer to as a pipeline. Here's a visual depiction of what a pipeline looks like in this particular case where we're talking about CloudFormation code or infrastructure as code. You'll have a developer or a series of developers work with templates that are committed to a repository, such as AWS Code Commit. Code Commit, whenever there's a commit happening there, it can trigger a build that would go through a pipeline that you've created, and then we can run tools. In the examples today, you'll see that we're going to be running CFN lint, TaskCat, and eventually send commands to CloudFormation. In this particular visual depiction, you can have CloudFormation first generated change sets so you can get a preview, especially if you have or are updating a stack that already exists. Today, through the example, we won't go through all the specific steps, but we will give you kind of like the beginnings of putting this combination of steps together from scratch. In this particular image, you'll see how we're deploying to staging first, and then once things look good in staging, you would want to deploy to production. This is where a tool like TaskCat can help you because it can deploy to multiple accounts and regions on your behalf, and you can do that late smoke test to make sure that before you're changing something in production, things look like you expect them to look. So I'll work here with Dan in going through a scenario. And in this scenario, we're going to be assuming that we inherited a template from somebody else. It doesn't work right now, but that's fine. Before we start troubleshooting the template, we'll set up a pipeline for this and any other future template that we may encounter. We'll set up our authoring environment. We'll validate our pipeline, make sure that when we do a commit and when we change the template itself, the whole pipeline and build steps execute. And then once we have all that ready, then we'll go ahead and fix our issues and then run it through the process again and see how we resolve the problem, not only for this particular case, but for any other future updates of this code or any other future templates. One of the things that we'll cover is setting up your authoring environment. Obviously, template code from CloudFormation is fairly simple text code. And we do know of a lot of people that use simple text editors to either work with or create brand new or update existing CloudFormation templates. However, we do recommend, since we're treating this infrastructure as code, we're treating it as code, that you use a code editor or an IDE. One of the tools that we're going to be using is a linter that we open source called CFN Python lint or CFN lint. And we have not only the ability to allow you to run this linter via an IDE plugin so that you can open files in your IDE and get instant warnings and errors about your files, but also you can run it headless on a pipeline. So this can be one of your approval steps to make sure that even before you do any other heavy-duty testing, that it has to pass the linter's rules. The linter, because it's open source, it allows you to not only use a plethora of built-in rules for syntax and for semantic validation, but it also allows you to add your own rules as well. And you can check that out on GitHub. It's been pretty popular. It's been around for a little bit over a year, and it has had over 100,000 downloads. So if you're doing any type of significant CloudFormation work, we strongly recommend you use this linter. Today, you'll see in the demo how we set this up with one of the more popular IDE editors out there, which is Visual Studio Code. And Dan will show you that in just a little bit. Another one of the tools that I think I mentioned a couple of times by now is TaskCat. As I mentioned before, this is vended or provided by our AWS QuickStart and Solutions team. Those folks are the guys that you will find in our website where they can give you a full-blown CloudFormation implementation of common software tools. Examples of those might be WordPress, as you've seen those examples a lot before. You can get a lot of other advanced examples like Windows servers, Active Directory, data lakes, Apache Zeppelin, and literally dozens more. Those templates are usually a good reference point to see how to properly build templates with proper automation and proper reuse with CloudFormation. In them building these templates over the years, they've also built tools to be able to quickly test those templates, those fairly complex templates. And that tooling called TaskCat is available to you as it is open source. Here's a link to that. You can also look it up in our website as well. And it can get fairly sophisticated in that you can have in a TaskCat testing plan a way to deploy that template automatically for testing in multiple regions and get a report with a pass-fail grade for each region. It also will go out there and not only generate these stacks, but it would also clean up after itself, which becomes important when it comes to making sure that you can manage the cost of your testing. All right, so those are the big pieces that we're going to be discussing today. I'm going to turn this presentation over to my colleague, Dan Blanco. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
And we'll go ahead and switch screens here.
Thanks, Luis.
All right, Dan, what are you showing me here?
So we are going to take a role play idea with this webinar. We are role playing as a DevOps engineer who has come onto any company, and we've inherited kind of a mess. The template that we know about has never been sourced. We just kind of got it in an email. The stack that we're working with is an update rollback complete, which means we tried to do an update at some point and it broke. It didn't take and it rolled it back. So we're not even sure what this is supposed to be doing. We can take a look at some of the resources and we can make a logical guess. This appears to be some sort of cognito user stack to handle everything, but we're not really sure what broke. We're not really sure what the last good template state is. We just have kind of a mess.
We can see here that you're using the updated CloudFormation console here, and you're recognizing part of that because, well, I know that you know what a user pool is, but you also see the resource type and the resources tab here.
Right. So we can actually see the types here, and just by inference, we can kind of guess. We have that old template that we were given. We can take a quick peek here, and it looks fine. Nothing stands out to me immediately. So
now go back and show me the browser screen here, because you can also see the template from this screen as well if you go into the template tab here. But this is what we were talking about before. If you use like just a plain text editor, you're not going to get some of the benefits that you would get from not only the IDE, but also from the way that the linter analyzes things. So switch back to Visual Studio Code. And you can see that this is YAML, right?
Yeah, and from what I can tell with just kind of like an untrained eye, this seems fine. I don't see anything egregious. Things look like they're correctly done, but I'm not really sure why this broke.
Okay.
So we're actually going to take a look at a template that I wrote over here, which is a CI template. It will spin up all of our CI pipeline for us. We'll spin up a code commit environment so we can actually commit this template to source for the first time ever. We set up a code build environment to make sure that we can actually build it, package the artifacts, and we set up a code pipeline to make sure that we can deploy it to CloudFormation. Now, since our template is kind of already broken, when we actually first commit this, we're going to commit this bare bones. We just want to get it into source. It'll deploy and it'll break. That's okay. It's not any more broken than it is right now. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and actually create a stack. If you guys haven't used our new console, please do. We worked really hard on this. We're very excited to show this off.
We had a whole team continuing to make enhancements on this console as
Absolutely. One of the most recent enhancements that we made is we pipeline. It's hard to type and talk at the same time. We listened to the feedback that folks had, and we actually made it so that our console shows multiple stacks a lot easier. You can navigate through the resources and the events of multiple stacks at the same time. It's a lot easier to work with things like nested stacks, as an example. So for our parameters, we actually need to tell it what the artifact name looks like. Let's go ahead and take a look at our Visual Studio Code. And it looks like it's called anycompany-auth-template. So we're going to go ahead and pop that in. Anycompany-auth-template. The name of our CFN stack, I don't remember it. Let's go ahead and find out what it was. Looks like it's called
the stack that had the update rollback.
Yes. Absolutely. It looks like it's called anycompany-auth stack. We're going to go ahead and copy that. Pop it in here. And the project name, this is the name that our repo is going to be called, that our pipeline is going to be called. We're just going to go ahead and call it anycompany. You're going to go ahead and submit it. Make sure it's going to create a couple of IAM roles, and it's going to deploy it out. One of the important things when you actually create a CI/CD pipeline is to understand the purpose of it. It's going to deploy your stack on your behalf. So our stack, as an example, references things like a Cognito pool, a Cognito pool client, an identity pool. All of these things require certain IAM permissions, and we need to both give our code build those same IAM permissions and our code pipeline those same IAM permissions. So even though we will release this template, the CI/CD template, as an example, it's not going to work for every case. You need to make sure you scope down your IAM privileges to the least amount needed. We don't really want a allow star for resource star. Make sure that your templates are as scoped down as they can be. Great. Take a look at this. This is my new favorite button in the console, this refresh button. I press it all the time to see all of the new events because I'm kind of impulsive like that. So it looks like we have spun up our CI/CD pipeline. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. Cool. It looks like our pipeline has spun up. We do have a failed code commit. Let's take a look at why that is. But we have a source step, which is our code commit. We have a build step, and we have a deploy step. Great. Let's take a look at why this failed. Code commit master, branch master does not exist. Makes sense. We haven't actually committed anything yet. Great. In our outputs, I've outputted the URL to code commit. We're going to go into our code editor. This is the same file that we were in our VS Code. We're going to go ahead and git remote add. Oh, we're going to get init first. Origin. We're going to paste this bad boy in. We're going to do a git status. Everything needs to be committed. First template commit. We're going to push it to master.
So the steps here is that you were obviously using Git locally. You were setting up and initiating your repository locally. You'll be working locally as you're doing your file edits. When you're ready to commit, you're going to be using the code commit that you just created with that CloudFormation template.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be code commit. We're using code commit because it's nice and it's easy to be authored by CloudFormation, but you can use any sort of Git tooling that you have. A very popular one is GitHub. You can use other things like Atlassian's Bitbucket. You can use GitLab. There are many options that you have, but just for ease of use, we're going to go ahead and use this one. And we'll actually take a look at our pipeline, and we'll see our pipeline in action. Great. So we actually committed. It passed the commit step. We're walking into the build phase.
Now show me the pipeline configuration here that you had on your YAML file.
Absolutely.
Because you defined these steps actually there, right?
Yes. So everything is defined via CloudFormation. Infrastructure as code is absolutely the way to go. So here I've actually defined the steps. The first step is a source, which is a code commit repository. After that, it's a code build, where we take the artifact from whatever you pass down via your code commit source. We build it however you define in a buildspec.yaml. I'm sure if our keen-eyed viewers have noticed I don't have one. We should expect this to fail. And then finally, once it actually does build, we pass that along to code deploy, to code pipeline, and code pipeline passes that out to CloudFormation, and it'll update our template. So let's go ahead and take a look. And just like that, we did fail our code build. Let's take a look why. We don't have a YAML file. Great. Let's go ahead and create one real quick here. Call it build spec.yaml. We need to put in a version, 0.2. All we really care about right now is making sure that we have some artifacts, type, zip, files, and here's where we need to put our any company auth template.yaml. We're also going to put a flag here called discard paths. This makes it so that if we nest this template in many files, we don't also take those files with us. I don't really care about the files. I just care about that.
Okay.
Great. Again, we're going to make sure that our build spec is here. Add build spec. And we're going to push it again. It's also really important. This is code that we're working with. Make sure your commits are useful. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing updated code for every single commit.
Talking about commit messages.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct. Great. And here we'll wait for our pipeline to pick up the changes and actually run through them. We do expect to see, once we finish this, to go through the build and all the way to deploy. Do you think it'll deploy out, Luis?
I'm going to guess no, because we really haven't fixed the template, right?
That's right. So our next step is to see this go all the way through and make it through to the deploy step, and it'll fail. CloudFormation will tell us, hey, this template doesn't look right. It broke last time. It's going to break this time. So some of the things that Luis was talking about, which is a really good idea, is you can have some pipelines, either one pipeline to handle all of your templates, or you can have a pipeline per template. It's up to you entirely. There's no right or wrong answer here. If you have a pipeline that handles all templates, you may start to get backed up a little bit. As people make a lot of commits all the time, you may start to see your pipeline start to queue up deployments. The way that is normally suggested is make a pipeline for each template that you're working with.
Yeah, and I think that because the templates are going to be, in some cases, some people will make the template one-to-one with an application. If you have a handful of applications, it may make sense to have a handful of pipelines. It makes the deployment of these applications independent of each other. Now, that can go a little bit crazy if you have hundreds of applications, where it may make more sense to break the pipeline in other ways. For example, you may have a pipeline that only updates networking and security roles, and you may have a pipeline that updates a class of applications. So you have to kind of like use your judgment there, right? To not have too many pipelines, but not to put everything in one pipeline that becomes very slow, right?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Make sure that you use the things that work for you. So we took a look here, and indeed our CloudFormation template did fail. We haven't fixed it. It's still broken, but at the very least, it's sourced, and we have a CI/CD pipeline that tries to go all the way through. Let's take a look at our template and see what's wrong. So to the untrained eye, it actually looks pretty okay. I don't really see anything out of the ordinary, but it's kind of a big template. There are a couple of resources, there are a couple of refs, and I don't know enough about this template to know exactly what it does. So we're going to call in a ringer here. We're actually going to install an extension. It's called CFN lint. CFN lint, VS Code CFN lint. Great. It was made by some of our AWS folks. It's an open source project, so if you want to see more, you want to introduce more rules, please feel free to join us on GitHub. So we've created this CFN lint. It's going to take a look at our template, and we're going to see a couple of issues here. It's going to see that ref SNS role doesn't exist. It looks like this was a parameter before, and it's no longer a parameter. Okay. I don't really see why the name has to be a ref, so we'll just go ahead and give it a sub of our auth name parameter,
Sure.
SNS role. Looks fine to me. So this is gone now. Great. Ref identity pool not found as a resource or parameter. Ref identity pool.
Here's another reference there.
I see Cognito identity pool, but no identity pool. This might be that somebody renamed this and never updated the template. We're going to go ahead and rename this. Great. We should get rid of a couple of these. Great. And so this one is not a breaking change, but there's no reason to have this parameter here, so we can just go ahead and remove it.
All right, so a couple of things that I'll highlight here. You are making changes and saving the file, and the plugin was smart enough to actually rescan the file as you went, so you can kind of like go through the changes and kind of like eliminate them as you go, and go from having a file with issues to having a file with non-issues. One thing that I know, because I've set up this before as well, is that the linter plugin for VS Code does require you to install the linter locally in advance. And the linter you can install with PyPy, because it's one of those, it's a Python-based linter, right?
Absolutely. So we can do something like this where we pip install CFN lint, and it'll install it for you.
And other things that I've seen with the linter is that not only can you install it locally, but you can actually go out there and refresh its definitions as well by updating the definitions of the linter.
That's correct. And updates happen all the time. As our resources change, we also need to update the definitions. So make sure that you update your CFN lint. What we're going to try and do in our actual build spec is we're going to do an upgrade every time. So we always pull the latest information. And you as a developer should probably be updating it as often as you want to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So not only does this work in our editor, let's go ahead and actually undo all the changes that we made. Go ahead and re-break this bad boy. We can actually run this locally. So we're going to go ahead and say CFN lint, and we're going to pass this in. I need to save. That does make sense. Cool. And it, again, will tell us, hey, things are broken. We can use this as a static analysis tool as part of our build step. We're not going to do that quite now, but that is a nice way of making sure.
Yeah, this is where you can ensure that a lot of people have gone through the process of actually linting the code. And let's say that you have a team of 6 developers, they're committing to the repo. That repo, those commits are going into your pipeline. You need to make sure that those lints are clean, or maybe with only warnings. This is the way that you would run it headless. Right now we're seeing it on your local machine, but on the server that this is all running builds, that's where you would run it headless, correct?
That's absolutely right. And this makes sure that we have a consistent code quality across the entire team. There are additional steps that you can take to make sure that this happens before any commits happen. But for our case, we're the sole developer on this. We just want to make sure that it runs locally. So we're going to go ahead and add a good commit message here. Add CFN lint, linted template to remove SNS ref errors, issues with
parameters,
logical resource ID, refs, and remove unused parameter. We're going to go ahead and push this off again. Great. And we should see our pipeline pick up this change, build it, and with a whole lot of luck, we'll go through all the way to prod, and it'll actually deploy out, and we should see some changes. I haven't actually created a change set for this because it's broken, right? I can't break it any further than it is, right? So we're going to try and just do this ad hoc. If you start to work with production stacks, things that are in production and are mission critical, we strongly suggest that you go as safe as possible, create a change set, make sure that somebody manually takes a look at it, says this is fine, and goes through, because there's nothing worse than dropping a production database.
Absolutely. And not only actually create a change set before you go into production, but it may make sense for you to create a change set when you go into pre-production or to go into stage and everything, and make sure that you can predict exactly what's going to happen in production as well.
Absolutely. Nothing wakes you up better early in the morning than dropping a production database.
Yeah, I see the reference here to your commit message here, where you just typed it, that you added CFN lint and removed the SNS reference errors and everything. So now we can see that this execution of the pipeline build is taking into account your latest change.
Yep. It's a nice little thing to make sure that you've picked up the latest changes. You can always take a look at the actual commit message as you go. You can actually take a look at the actual commit to make sure that everything looks fine. The good news here is we didn't immediately fail the CloudFormation deployment. Last time we immediately failed it. It looks to be going all the way through. You can check out the actual details here by clicking on it. It'll open the details. We're able to see our CloudFormation template. And it looks to be in update complete. It looks like we actually updated our template, and now it's back in working order. Great. Perfect. So now we've fixed our template, but we want to make it such that we can never get into a broken state again. I never want to be able to maliciously commit a template that I know will break and make it to prod. I need some sort of guardrail, some sort of steps to prevent that from happening. Now, we can't do that in the deploy step. We can't do that in the code commit step, but we can do that in the build step. Let's go ahead and actually jump in here and take a look. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do this via the build spec, right? So the first thing that we talked about before was we can run our CFN lint tool in a headless mode, right? We can say, hey, before you actually finish this, make sure that everything lints properly. We also talked about TaskCat and running TaskCat. So as Luis alluded to earlier, TaskCat actually takes a template that you provide and any additional parameters that you may need, and it actually deploys it out and makes sure that it completes, and then when it does, it rolls it back. This makes sure that any template that goes from your repo to prod works every time, guaranteed. So let's go ahead and actually start working on some of this stuff. For TaskCat to work, if you'll take a look at the actual documentation, it needs a very specific file structure. Let's go ahead and we're going to call this any company auth. We're going to add a CI file, CI folder, and a templates folder. We're going to drop the templates into templates. Yep. And we're going to, in CI, we're going to make a taskcat.yaml. Again, this is all part of the public documentation. Feel free to follow along if you'd like. I've used this a couple of times, so I kind of know what I'm doing here. So we're going to give this a global, we're going to give this an author. Blog at any company. We'll use my real email. We're going to give this the QS name, which is the name of the folder. So in our case, any company auth. And we're going to tell us the regions that it deploys to. For our regions, we do US East 2. Great. Next.
US East 2, right?
Oh, yeah, US East E. I don't think that's a region.
Yeah, and I think the QS name probably comes from QuickStarts too.
Yeah, that does make sense. Now we're actually going to define what our tests look like, what our test cases look like. So we're going to do a really easy one. We're going to do test US East 2. That's kind of where we're deploying to. You can make sure if you do 15 regions, you can deploy to 15 regions. If you do all 21 of our regions, you can deploy to 21 of our regions. So let's actually jump in here. For our regions, we only really want US East 2. US East 2. And we're going to include the templates file. That is any company auth template.yaml. Great. And then we're going to include parameter input. This is the way that we define what parameters we want for this template. Our template only really has one parameter, but as your templates get more complex and you need to make sure you plug and play more things, you'll be able to add things, and they may be different every time. You may have an environment parameter where you're saying this is in production, this is in development, this is in QA, and based on that, you may have some mapping. So this is the way that TaskCat allows you to define this. So our parameter is actually called auth name, so we're going to go ahead and create a any company auth parameters.json. This is a JSON file, so we're going to give this a parameter key, and this one's called auth name, and we're going to give this a parameter value, and we'll call this any company US East 2 test. Great. And we will give this any company auth parameters. If you notice on these specific files, we're not actually telling it where it's located. Based off of the file structure, it's smart enough to know, hey, this is in the templates folder. Hey, this is in the CI folder. Great. Let's actually try and run this locally. Actually, where are we? See, any company auth, CI, taskcat. So I've installed this locally. Owner missing. I think I am the owner. Am I not? Oh, author. It's owner.
Amazing how validation works.
I know. I am useless without a good code editor. So it's actually going to try and deploy out my stack. It's going to actually deploy a live stack. So if you have a stack that may have some conflicts with another stack, make sure that you're deploying it to a test account. For our cases here, we're trying to be really simple, trying to be really efficient. We're just deploying it in our same account. We can actually pull up our CloudFormation
and see the taskcat operations.
Right.
Yeah, and you also notice that once it completes and everything, and it completes with everything going green, it'll clean up after it.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, one of the reasons, if you're curious, as you see this, why does it let you kind of go to multiple regions? I think that there's cases where a particular new service may not be available in a region. So by just testing in one region, sometimes it's not enough. You want to test on potentially the 3 or 4 regions that you might use your application and make sure that all the application's dependencies or requirements do exist and are active in that region, right?
Absolutely. And not only that, but some of our applications may require to exist in multiple regions if you use something like stack sets, right? You want to have some governance across your entire account. So you may want to deploy these to multiple locations. We need to make sure that you can do that. So it looks like here, we seem to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's cleaning up the stacks.
Yep. Now. So stack launch was successful. It looks like this did work, which is good, right? And now so this works locally, fine and dandy. We need to make sure that this works on our build server. So we're going to have to change our build spec a little bit. Let's go ahead and talk about the phases that's going to happen. For this particular build tool, and every CI tool is different, we can define what happens in each phase. So for our purposes, we only care about 2 phases. The install phase, we actually need to install both taskcat and CFN-lint. So we're going to do pip install taskcat CFN-lint for this one. And then for the build phase, we're going to run CFN-lint. We need to make sure that we follow the correct folder structure here. So any company auth templates. And let's go ahead and make sure that we have the name for this one. Great. Pass the template flag. And same thing with taskcat. C, any company auth, CI, taskcat, YAML. And lastly, we need to make sure that we change this to, actually, we've already done this, so we're going to copy this one. Great. Perfect.
And you don't need the YAML termination for the CFN-lint command?
I'm sorry?
You don't need the YAML extension on the file for the CFN-lint command?
That is correct. Good call. Good catch.
Yeah.
Cool. So add taskcat, rearrange file structure to match, and CFN-lint and taskcat as build steps in build spec. And that should do it. We're going to go ahead and watch this one jump through all of the hoops. But the idea now is that when we go to push any sort of changes to our template, we have to go through our commit repository. We then go through our build step, which lints it, and then actually does a taskcat deploy to make sure it deploys. And only when these succeed do we allow an automatic promotion to production.
So now our pipeline looks like a real pipeline with a couple of test stages in between.
Yes.
And this will work not only for the template that we are using in this demo, but it will work for every template.
That's absolutely right. For different templates with different resources, we do need to change the IAM permissions. But yes, you're absolutely correct. This is a global type idea. This is not only for this type of demo. This will work for any template you throw at it. Further steps that you can take, which I strongly suggest, is once you actually do make sure that your deployment does go to production, remove anybody's access from it. Nobody can touch a production stack without going through the proper tools. This makes it so that you don't have that issue where, well, we're not really sure what's in production because somebody did a manual update. No, nobody can touch this stack. This stack is essentially dead to everybody except our tooling. Okay, it looks like we actually had an error here. Let's see what actually happened. Take a look at our phase details, a YAML file error. Oh, okay. I see what I did here. Okay. My YAML file is not properly formatted. I am useless without a good file editor, Luis.
Well, yeah, it's one of those where like YAML can be very specific in terms of when you're building lists of stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely. So let's make sure that everything looks fine. Great. This does look okay. Files. I'll go ahead and give this one of these. Great. Actually, let's make sure this is a little bigger. Great. Fix build spec YAML issues. Need a linter for YAML. It didn't like that. Great. And
how confident are you that this is going to work now? In a scale of 1 to 10.
I'm going to lie to you and say 10.
All right. I'm liking the confidence.
Cool. So now again, this should pick up our changes and actually go all the way through. Hopefully I can type well this time, but the idea is we'll make sure that we can run our CFN lint and we can run our taskcat before we actually move
It's all these people in this webinar that are making you nervous. It's an audience thing. Some people sometimes react kind of like weirdly when they have like 1,700 eyes.
Yeah, when you're actually coding and somebody else is watching you, I think you lose 40 IQ points, and I need all of them. Great. So yeah, this is actually going to pick up our changes, assuming that this has actually gone through. Yeah, perfect. This is going to pick up our changes and actually start a build and actually commit it through to source. So that is the idea of what we're trying to do with making sure that our CI/CD pipeline is built, is robust, make sure that we can handle any type of thing that we throw at it. So now anybody who wants to commit, and we can share this code commit repo with our entire enterprise. Anybody can commit, and all they have to do is make sure that they follow the guidelines and make sure that it runs locally before they actually commit, and everything is safe, self-healing, and automated.
Yeah, and I think that I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again here, that when people think about, when they first start talking about pipelines and CI/CD, and these pipelines can handle not only our code, but also any other type of application code as well, that don't expect that pipeline to stay static. Like you have to go in there and kind of like start to add stages into your pipeline. The pipeline over time will change dramatically from the first version of your pipeline, and it's something that you have to maintain and own. But ideally, over time, you'll become more robust. You'll come up with better tests, and more things that break will motivate more tests as well. So it's important that people understand that a pipeline is not the kind of thing you build once and you don't touch it again, much like a stack, really.
Absolutely. And it's important to know that we've invested a minimum amount of time now, and we've bought so much time in the future. No one's going to have to deal with, hey, this stack is broken because somebody deployed a broken stack. So the idea is we invest time now to save time in the future. And we're going to, it's like everything, it has some tech debt, and tech debt carries interest. And we're going to pay off that interest from time to time, but it's not anywhere close to what we've done before.
So really the two key takeaways from thinking about that tech debt and thinking about like long-term good steps is not only does the pipeline need to change over time and you need to kind of like care and feed it, but also now that you have it in place, now you bring all your code to this pipeline. So you start kind of like organizing your repo, start giving people access to it, and you'll give them access to experiment and do their commits and everything so that you can restrict their access to production and have a more orderly, auditable set of changes in production, right?
Right. We never want the situation where, like we talked about before, where we don't know what's in production, where somebody made a file and then they committed it and we're not really sure, we can't roll it back. We don't know what's a safe place to do. Now, if we were to leave any company, the next person who comes in knows about our pipeline, knows about how things work, and has an audit trail via our commit history to know what works and what doesn't.
So we have accomplished a whole bunch of things here. Not only were we able to create a whole commit, repo, build steps, a pipeline. Number one, we were able to do that. Number two, we were able to do it with CloudFormation in an automated manner. So we can, when we build the next pipeline, we can start from this particular template that we went through. Two, we set up our ideal authoring environment, really. We have Visual Studio Code. It recognizes YAML properly. You get your syntax highlighting. Plus, you get your linter that you can recognize many errors very quickly on a single file. Or if you point it to a whole bunch of files that are templates in a directory, it will recognize all the errors in those files, and you can clean things up. We then turn around and created a headless version of that linter and run it in our pipeline. We also look at how Tasket can make it easy to see how your stack reacts in different regions if the dependencies are different. And then we laid out the groundwork for any other, like you said before, template that you might inherit, that you can have a process to handle that. So that's excellent.
Absolutely. So here in our demo, we've gone all the way through. We've successfully deployed a CloudFormation, and now we have robust guardrails to make sure that our future commits and templates will work. I don't think it's appropriate to make a CI/CD pipeline for our CI/CD pipeline. I think it's a little too meta.
A little MC Escher. Okay. Well, that's a great demo. I really appreciate you taking the time to show us that through.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, Dan, for the demo. And again, as I highlighted just now, you want to move forward. Make sure that you are treating the code as code, and part of that is putting your code in repos. We use code commit here, but you can use GitHub or Git or any other repo like that. And again, highlighting again that your pipeline is a living, breathing thing. So we may have some time for questions, and we do look forward to hearing your feedback. You can also contact us via Twitter, via the handles here on this slide, or via email. And we really appreciate you guys sticking around with us and going through this. We hope we gave you a really good insight as to not only thinking about CloudFormation as an infrastructure automation tool, but also think about CloudFormation code as code and think how you would test that code as well.